Welcome to the Essentially You podcast. Andrea, honey, how are you doing today, girl?
I am so good, and I'm so excited to be here with you, Mariza.
I am so excited to have you here as well. We are talking about an area that millions of women are struggling with, and that is autoimmunity. And so often in that struggle, and or any struggle that we may be having, whether we're dealing with chronic fatigue or we're dealing with insulin resistance or just not feeling like we've got enough energy to get through the day, so much of that is about owning our health story. And I know that you have such an incredible health story yourself that has really catapulted you into educating so many people around the world about how to own it, how to manage their nutrition, and most importantly, also how to address, the autoimmune condition. So I would love for you for just a moment to kind of just share your own journey and kind of that defining moment for you, Andrea, where you decided like, I need to be educating not only people, but also practitioners so
Yes.
that we can get better information out there into the world.
Yeah, I mean, the practitioner training, and I educate now about 4,000 practitioners a year, which is pretty phenomenal. It's such a great opportunity, and I feel so privileged to do it. But it was born over time, and my original journey into healthcare, as is true for many of us, arose from a family health crisis. So my husband, Isamu, my late husband, was diagnosed with a very grave brain tumor when I was just 7 weeks pregnant. And so that was a big wake up. I was already interested in food and nutrition, but it wasn't really in the health arena as much as just kind of manage my own little things, which I think were the precursors to my autoimmunity, looking back and understanding and knowing what I know now. So I think of that time with my husband during my pregnancy as my nutrition boot camp, because of course we had to do all the medical work, but nobody was advising us of the things that we could do between the surgeries, between the radiation, between the chemotherapy to really own our own self-care. So he was given 6 months to live. This is back in April of 2000. He lived 2.5 years. So he died when our son was 19 months old. And my autoimmune diagnosis came years later. No surprise to you and I, knowing that pregnancy in and of itself can be a trigger for autoimmunity. So for me, it's been a real journey to the work I do today, educating so many, but also in my own care as somebody who is going through a huge medical crisis with a family member, and then my own medical crisis with my own autoimmune diagnosis.
Mm. That's a lot. It's a lot to be going through. And, and being a single mama, raising your son at the same time. I want to talk a little bit about kind of the advent of that diagnosis for you.
Yeah.
Do you find when you finally got diagnosed, how long do you think it was that you were struggling with an autoimmune condition before you were able to identify?
Yeah, that's such a great question because as we know, it usually takes at least 3 years for doctors. There's that time period where we have the signs and symptoms that just aren't going away, and people are not quite listening to what we're trying to say. I call this medical gaslighting. It might be medical gaslighting light, but it's that situation where we're trying to show up, raise our hands, say, something's going on for me. And it was for me labeled many different things before it was labeled Hashimoto's. And it was a frustrating process because I knew something was going on in my body. I couldn't identify it. And everybody was looking through what I'm going to call their mono lens, whether it's adrenal fatigue or it's small intestinal bacterial, it's everybody, metal toxicity, whatever is in vogue at that time, we tend to be seen through that lens. And so there's a lot more awareness about Hashimoto's now than there was when I was trying to find my way. So I actually was able to determine it for myself before it received the label from a practitioner.
So I wanted to just have you share that because I had a feeling that was very much the situation. When I was diagnosed with Hashimoto's, I'm guessing I had it for 2 to 3 years where it really was noticeable for me.
Yep.
And I kept getting put in the bucket of adrenal fatigue,
Yep.
and of stress. And, cut your calories, exercise more, like just the basic run of the mill advice, labs within that mono lens looked normal. And so I just wanted to just speak into that, because light gaslighting, medium gaslighting, gaslighting of any kind, especially when it comes to autoimmune conditions, when predominantly those who get it are women, we see that it can take a long time to get that diagnosis. And I just wanted you to share your story. So once you were able to identify, like, you're like, okay, this is what's going on with me. What were some of the steps? What were some of the things that you began to implement, knowing that you had walked through this really massive journey with your husband?
Yeah. And at the time, I want to say I was eating like the healthy diet, right? Like I was eating what I thought was like a brilliantly healthy diet because we had changed our diet when my husband was sick. And this, with my own diagnosis, didn't happen until years after he had passed away. So, as you said, I'm a single mom. I'm putting myself back through school while working full time, starting a business, all the stress. You could see how somebody would be like, oh, yeah, adrenal fatigue, stress. But that actually isn't. I'm a bit of an energizer bunny, knock on wood. Wasn't my thing. It was something going on with my thyroid and my hormones. So for me, I don't take a target practice approach. My approach is what I like to think of as the three tiers or the three roots. How do we work in our circle of influence so we're not just reliant on what the provider can recommend to us? So in my three tiers, I think of it as tier one, non-negotiables, tier two, deficiency to sufficiency, and tier three, dismantling dysfunction. I think in most medicine, not functional medicine, hopefully, but in most medical practices and as patients, we're often looking for the tier three issue or approach. Like, what do I need to do for this? What's the fix? Where's my medication? Even if it's compounded. And the way I go in is more into what I think of as the soil. What are my non-negotiables? What do I need to pay heed to? And non-negotiables for me might have been eliminating certain foods, like for me, refined sugar, gluten, dairy, not necessarily right for everybody. I'm not recommending that. But also, what do I know to be true for myself? Like my bedtime, and starting to define what do I need in my life to help nurture myself. What is my movement like? What is my relationship? What are my relationships like? Where do I need social time? Where do I need downtime? Where do I need inspiration in my life? So I really like to help people understand what their non-negotiables are. And we might be working on deficiencies at the same time, but when we sit in this area, we actually sit more deeply in our circle of influence. So for me, it was all the things. It was sleep and relaxation, exercise and movement, nutrition and hydration, stress and resilience practices, and my relationships and networks, and understanding what I needed in each of those areas through trial and error.
Hmm. And so important. I think that is a part of that health journey. Andrea, honey, did you, when you were looking at kind of, okay, this is what's going on with me, this is what's happening, was there ever kind of the thought or the conversation within you that was like, well, how is this happening? Why does this even happen to me? Like, what's going on? Like, we definitely know pregnancy could be a trigger up for Haji's trauma. Overcoming something big could be your gut just not always being the happiest camper. Stress can play a major role here. Nutrient deficiencies is a part of that. So when you were digging into not only just non-negotiables, like what were non-negotiables for you, not only for addressing this autoimmune condition, but also just addressing the way that you want your body to feel. Because I think that some of those non-negotiables are like, whether I've got this autoimmune condition or not, this is a wake-up call for me to say, okay, here are the non-negotiables for myself. But was there any investigation or digging into of like, gosh darn, like, how did I land this? Or like,
yeah, totally.
I was just curious. And in that discovery, were there some things that you implemented when you figured out, or when you kind of wanted to go into that inquiry?
it's hard for me not to think in my approach now, right? Like, and how what I was doing manifested into the approach that I teach, because I think I was doing it intuitively and now I've almost like encapsulated it,
Mm-hmm.
right? So if we look at those three roots, and
Yeah.
it's like the three-legged stool that we think of in functional medicine that Alessio Fasano defined, those roots are the genes, digestion, and inflammation. So just like you spoke about, right, those gut issues, the stress, but I like to think about the fact that like it's not our job to fix the roots. It's our job to get into that soil, like I said, that surrounds those roots. So around each of those roots, I have a circle of influence that allows us, and it allowed me in when I was doing it more intuitively, to think about what those things are. So around the genes, there's a common metaphor used for the genes that I'm not going to use, but I'm going to say we get dealt a deck of cards, like, or a hand of cards, like in a game of poker, and we get to choose how to play it. So for me, the whole way that I approach things is going from the why me, which you're talking about, to the oh, me, like this is my truth. These things
Totally.
have all been activated. My genes were here. There's digestive issues, there's inflammation issues. This is the hand I've been dealt. How do I play with it? So,
Mm-hmm.
the circle of influence around the genes is the food, the movement, the environment, and the mindset. The circle of influence around digestion is the mechanical, chemical, structural, microbial. And when I say these things, they're not a one and done. It's always thinking about it. And that digestion piece is so important because, from my vantage point, we cannot talk about nutrition without talking about the form and function of our digestive system. And that inflammation route, so genes, digestion, inflammation, is to clear, calm, enhance, and modulate. I may be clearing a food. I may be clearing a microbial infection. I may be clearing a toxin. I may be clearing a negative mindset. But for me, it was really thinking through that kind of matrixed perspective that I can now speak about the way I'm talking about it. But I was just naturally recognizing that I can't snap my fingers and change my immune system's attack on my thyroid tissue, that I had to kind of get in there and play around with all the things. So I don't know if that answers your question about what I did, but I think I go broad, and that's what I naturally did, as opposed to seeking the selenium or the zinc. I mean, that understanding is important too.
Yeah. And I was thinking about in my own journey. I remember getting the diagnosis, and it was the year I was 38. It was the year that we had just gotten back from Italy, and we were like, okay, we're going to start gearing up to have this, get pregnant. And I was like, I want a full workup. I haven't been feeling 100%. The Italy trip was really lovely, but like it was time to come in and just really prepare. Like I was so intentional about bringing this my little super baby into the world. And I just knew there was this like, although we had run labs and I kept getting the no, you're good, like, there's just this gut feel, this intuition
Yes.
that you got to lean into. And so sure enough, got him. Yes, yep, there it is, the Hashimoto's diagnosis. And I remember that the nutrition piece was the first piece, that I knew, that intelligence that we put into our bodies, that information, those nutrients, loving my gut, protecting my liver, like those were the things I just knew those were non-negotiables. And then working on a lot of those other pieces too, like how is my sleep, how is my movement, what's my level of stress on the day to day, like let's take a look at all of these. But I feel like nutrition was such a major, probably the foundation of how I was able to, similar to you, move out of 95% of my symptoms. And
Yes.
I'd love for you to speak into that. It took a whole year. I
Yes.
just devoted an entire year to just nurturing and discovery and trying to figure out like how to really get my body back to a place of equilibrium. Clearly we were looking at labs too, but like how I felt, like,
Yes.
then gave myself another 6 months to prime up for baby Kingston. And
Smart.
so, and so
So
there was this whole
smart.
like journey. I know, and I know so often when people are listening to the show and people are listening to such an incredible expert and educator like yourself, and they have this gut feeling, this intuition that something isn't right. But they're getting the run of the mill. I'm only going to run your TSH, or I'm not going to look at your thyroid labs again. We looked at them a year ago, or I won't run your hemoglobin A1C again because it was, it was not pre-diabetic yet. Really what I wanted to get from that was, when we're in that kind of, we're not sure we're getting the right answer, we're not sure where to start. What is how does that journey look, or
Yes.
how would that journey start for some of us who we're not even quite sure we know what we're dealing with?
Yeah, I think that's such an important point. And I don't like when we get so focused on what we're looking for outside of ourselves. So the truth is, even if you have a diagnosis, you're going to need to do the work at home. So the way I think about it is take care, like actually take it. Like it is yours to take, whether you have the diagnosis or not. What happens is we go on this quest, this sympathetic, driven quest for the answers. And I'm not saying we don't do that, but there needs to be a balance between what we're doing to support ourselves when we have those clues that something isn't right at the same time. And so the first thing to do is, what do I know are my non-negotiables? Like, people will tell me I can't sleep unless I take my magnesium. Great, that's a non-negotiable for you. I can't drink alcohol or green tea. Everybody's talking about green tea, but it makes me feel X. We know some of our non-negotiables. We just innately know them. I really encourage people to write them down, to bank on them. And those non-negotiables might mean I need cuddle time with my honey once a week. I need to listen to podcasts that really inspire and energize me. Like, really know your non-negotiables and spend time nurturing those. That for me is step one, while you're looking, while you're trying to find out more. Because when we're doing those things as a baseline, we have more fortitude to do more for ourselves, to trial new things. I also think it's more important that we tune into ourselves than all the noise out there that's telling us to do things or take things or eat a certain way that isn't necessarily right for us, that can be more triggering. So we have to be careful with the information, whether it's a keto diet or an intermittent fasting. It's information, but it may not be the right information for you. So I think we've lost sight of tuning in. We know something's wrong, but we bypass it to trial what we think is going to be the next best thing, or to find that next pill, protocol, or practitioner. So I think we got to spend more time banking in what we do know about ourselves, and there's clues and information there to do the methodical next steps, like you were talking about. Took a year to take care and to do some of that healing, and then you prepared your body for pregnancy, which is so smart.
Well, and I was thinking about, because I know, I've asked my community before, like, just what brings you joy? Like, what are the things that you love to bring you joy? And sometimes they don't know because they haven't done that inquiry. And
Yes.
so I was thinking about the non-negotiables, and even within the realm of intermittent fasting, or the realm of keto cycling, or whatever, we'll throw it out there, that whether you've experimented with these things or not, or HIIT training, what is it within the realm that your body can do? Like, for instance, a great example is one of the ways, well, how I kept getting diagnosed with the the adrenal fatigue was that after an hour HIIT workout, I was fully depleted.
Yes.
And I was just fighting my way through these workouts, and on the other side of it, just a complete mess, and taking a big, like, I just knew I needed 3 months off from all of that. Like, my
Totally.
body needed major recovery, but I also wanted to get back to maintaining. I always loved working out. I always loved building muscle mass. It felt good. It was a stress reliever. So what does this new version of me look like where I get to do this, but I also get to do this within the realm of what feels good for my body, and that I don't push the envelope to exhaustion. And so, it's weight training. It's 20 minutes max.
Yes.
And I feel great. I feel energized. If it's anything, if I sometimes maybe 25, but anything past 30, it's like I hit a proverbial cliff. Like I just go straight down. And so I love that permission of that you're giving us to just experiment, to find out and to write down. Because I think inquiry here is so important. Like some of us may unconsciously know our non-negotiables, but we've never written them down, and getting super clear about what those are. Or some of us may know that something isn't right, but we're unconsciously just the freight train going through because we are the single mom. We've got the family to run. We've got the business to run. And we got the blinders on like the little horse, and we were running the race. And so I really love the idea of us, like, what do I like on the day to day tuning in? Like, what can I tune into? Like maybe at night, just going back through our day and saying, okay, wow, I did this thing, but it didn't serve me. Like I didn't feel super great after it. Or I did this other thing and man, like that was something that made, like taking magnesium before bed or doing an Epsom salt bath before bed. Like that felt so good. And so I love the idea. Like, I just wanted to put more like clarity to it of like, how do we sit down with ourselves? How do we sit down in inquiry about our bodies? Then starting to curate that list versus chasing the thing.
Exactly. And so much of what you're talking about, and I love that you spoke about the 25 minutes, 20 to 30 minutes, not more than 30 minutes of your weight training, right? This is where we actually can also adhere to these things that make us feel good. When they're really big, when we make them too big, they're sprints. And the truth is that managing a chronic condition like an autoimmune condition or any chronic condition, like you mentioned at the beginning, chronic fatigue, whether it's cancer, whether it's fibromyalgia or PCOS, chronic health conditions need a different approach. So we're still applying what the economist Daniel Kahneman thinks of as fast thinking to problems that require slow thinking. So our medical system has fast thinking in place and down pat where it's necessary. Like, thank goodness you go to the emergency room and they've got fast thinking. Unfortunately, most of our healthcare is a fast thinking model, and a chronic condition that is hard to manage requires slow thinking. It requires that slow down, angling in from a different perspective. It's not just one thing. Your Hashimoto's is different than my Hashimoto's. So we got to the tipping point where we received the same label, but we received that label and our bodies did something similar for very different reasons. So taking that 3-tiered or that 3-root, that approach that allows us to find our way in and check in with ourselves and think what's right for me is what leads to more sustainable results. I worry, Mariza, that with all the noise out there, that sometimes, especially women looking for the quick fix, actually end up doing ourselves more harm than good, adopting principles that aren't right for our bodies at that time.
Oh, 100%. That's definitely happening. I mean, we've been trained to think about a fast thinking model. We're trained to desire the fast thinking model because that's what we've always been, many of us were brought up with. And so, yeah, and absolutely can do us more harm than good in certain circumstances, especially when many of us, what we're addressing isn't always an acute concern. It is more of a chronic concern.
Correct.
Like you and myself,
Yes.
whether they may look like different, although the label's the same.
Yes.
How we both came about that label very differently, and how we manage it could be very differently, but it's always something that you and I are actively managing.
Yes.
I'm always mindful, especially as a new mama to a toddler. I am so mindful about what the day-to-day looks like so that I've got not only for myself, feeling great for myself, but then also showing up as the mama I want to be. And I know that all comes into play too.
Yeah, that's such an important piece of it because you found your purpose both as a mama and wanting to be present, and also as a partner and as a businesswoman, I think that when we have found and tapped into that passion and that purpose, that becomes a bigger driver than what it feels like we might be missing out on by deciding to go to sleep at 9:30 or 10 p.m. or waking up at 5 a.m. to be able to get in some movement or some prayer or whatever it is that works. The risk reward ratio is very different when you're driven towards something that's calling you. And for some people, I know that's, a higher power. And for some people, it's a higher purpose. But allowing ourselves to actually come into what some people call our why
Mhm.
really is the bigger driver that puts everything else in perspective so that we're not feeling like we're missing out by taking care of ourselves.
I agree. I agree that yes, 100%. When we've got purpose behind whatever that purpose may be, yeah, there's a full on a bigger commitment to really honor ourselves in the process, because we know that by doing that we get to honor the thing that matters a lot to us. So I agree with you. Yeah, like and I know that so many mamas listening to this conversation today can really relate about, taking care of themselves to be there for their families. Or and it can be, like I said, any purpose. I know that is a huge resonating for me. Like I saw that purpose well before Kingston came in. um
Totally. I love that. I love it. And I love that we're at different phases, in our mamahood. I mean, I was just saying my son's 21 and he has his first internship in New York City across the country from me. But I'm still the mama, I'm still holding that place. And I think we want to be present and evolve and become the women that we are meant to be as mamas, as partners, as creators, whatever it is, but really allowing that to inspire our moves in the world.
Oh, 100. Yes, I love that. I love that. And I'm just so happy for you, getting to see your son thrive and being in that different phase of what does that new evolution for you look like as well. I think that's, it's so interesting as we're talking about different phases and different evolutions in our lives where, kind of bringing back to that inquiry of like
Yes.
where we want to focus, who do we want to become, how do we want to feel moving into this next evolution? Because every one of us at some level are in some kind of transition and
Yes.
we're moving into that next thing. And I think I think you just really doing that inquiry, knowing who you are, that is about owning your health story. Is there anything else, Andrea, about owning your health story that you want to really help us focus into?
Yeah, I think that there is that piece of that looking outside. I want to return just for a minute to that moment of medical gaslighting, because I think so many of us women have experienced where we are dismissed. I mean, historically, we've been dismissed for issues we're experiencing that aren't heard for what they are or aren't investigated. And I did really think through, like, how do we heal from that experience? And the three steps I came up with are, first of all, we have to forgive ourselves for the fact that that happened to us. And I've been in situations where, like I said, I was seen as an adrenal fatigue case when that wasn't my issue, where I'm like in stirrups getting my annual women's exam, and the doctor's not even looking to me and talking to me about birth control like 6 months after my husband died. And I'm trying to say, like, not my issue right now. Right. So there's those situations where we're just not seen for who we are. And you leave those situations feeling the brunt of them. And that's not healthy either. That's its own little micro trauma that happens to us over and over and over again. So I think when we walk out of those situations and we have the awareness, like, that didn't feel right, I didn't feel seen. First thing, forgive yourself. You did not know it was going to happen. And I think that that's true of other situations where we find ourselves like feel less than ideally received, which happens a lot too as women. So forgive yourself. Number two is explore your options. So not all of us have the opportunity to go, that sucked, I'm picking another doctor, right? That's not always the situation. And there's a number of reasons we might have to stick with the doctor we're seeing, or that we can't just take it in. It seems like we can't just take it into our own hands. And I think at that moment, it's about shifting our expectations to manage our medical relationships more. If you can't get what you want, you can't get that full thyroid panel, it's okay. Get what you can out of that doctor and see if there's another way to take care of yourself, as if you know something more, or you can support yourself without the knowledge that you're seeking in that moment. Because I don't know about you, Mariza, but I see so many people spending so much energy frustrated that their doctor won't run a functional lab test that they think is going to give them all the answers. First of all, that one test isn't going to give you all the answers. And second of all, there's other ways in. We don't want our doctors doing things they don't understand. Like, it's not their fault either. We have to honor the expectation of what that doctor can do. Another one people come to me with a lot is, what if my doctor doesn't believe that my diet actually matters? I'm like, who cares? Your doctor doesn't, you don't talk to your doctor about like what you made for dinner or when you clip your toenails. Like, they got 17 hours of nutrition training in school out of their near 47,000 hours of training. Go to somebody or look for the information that's trusted for you. So the second one in there is to consider your options. So forgive yourself, consider your options. How do I shift my relationship? And the third one is what we're coming back to. Take care. What does that mean for you? What could look different? How do you track for yourself? Get that list talking that we were talking about of your non-negotiables. And then if you want to try something, track how you feel. I'm big on tracking. I call it the art of our practice. So you assess, what do I like to do? You think about, what am I going to recommend to myself or to others? And then I track, and that informs my next step. And don't do it all at once. Don't take 10 supplements at the same time to begin with. Like, you can't track, and it's not the scientific method if you're doing too much or introducing too much change at once. So I hope that's just clear. And like, it's kind of like back up and take stock versus like, oh, go do this or take that.
I love this. I love this so much. And this is ownership.
The ownership,
like
agency.
You go to your, exactly, it's agency. You go to your primary. Your primary isn't a functional practitioner. They're not a hormone doctor. It's like trying to buy milk at the hardware store,
Exactly.
and so you're just not going to get what they're just not going to have milk there. And that is okay, as long as you're okay with that too, as you mentioned.
Exactly.
And you're right. That one test isn't going to make or break the lifestyle, the habits, the knowing your body. It just isn't. And I talk a lot about on this show of like, I know so often we want to know the thing. We want to know what it is because we've been programmed to know that we need to know the thing. I was like, but listen, the diagnosis or not, the things that you're going to do to love upon your body, you can do those without the diagnosis, and there are so many side benefits to you taking in those non-negotiables, whether
Exactly.
you've got the lab or not, to give you that full diagnosis. Whether I had the Hashimoto's diagnosis or not, loving up on my gut and supporting my central nervous system and helping to reduce my stress levels and taking a break from the HIIT training, like it was all a win, whether I saw the labs or not. And so I'm so grateful that you're saying that, because I know so often women are so, because that's who's listening to this show, girl, is they're so angry. They're just like, they won't do it. Like, I'm so angry. And I'm just like, you know what? Like, screw them, and, and it's you, guess what? It's your body. It is, you have agency over your body. You get to make the choices over your body. They don't get to dictate that for you. And you get to decide, like, you know what? This is my show. This is my
Yes.
rodeo. Like, I get to bring in information. I get to listen to the show. I get to read books that feel good to me. But at the end of the day, it is my decision, my choice. And the more that we get more comfortable with that, and we feel good about that, then it is a heck yes. And I was about to ask you about tracking, actually, because I was going to say, where do you stand on that? Because as I feel, that's how we really get to know our bodies. Because as I
Yes.
mentioned, it is easy to put the blinders on, you know?
Totally. Yeah. And so much of what you said is just so important. And people who have diagnoses are celebrating for like a minute because they know what it
Right.
is. And then they're back to the same place we are when we don't have the diagnosis. And that's just the reality when we're looking at chronic health care, right? So different situation than when we're looking at acute care. So I'm a huge fan of all sorts of tracking. I love to food, mood, poop tracking when it's appropriate. So if somebody is triggered by tracking their food, we have a lot of people now aware of body dysmorphia, growing up in diet culture and wanting to shift out of anti-diet culture. For me, tracking isn't about counting calories or about judging. It's about having the data that we can then step back and understand what might have been correlated to each other, right? So food, mood, poop tracking, that mood I put in quotation marks or air quotes, because it's any sign or symptom. It's not just our psychological mood, it's our physiological mood. And I like looking at that for 3 to 5 days. Again, no judgment. We're not analyzing, we're not changing our diet during that time. We're just looking at what did I put into my body and how did I feel and how did I poop? And then we can step back and say, is there anything I can connect the dots on here for myself? Are there any things I can correlate and then try out differently? Oh, I didn't eat breakfast that morning. I was tired that day or had more cravings that lunchtime. Whatever it is, we can start to maybe see by tracking. I also like to track other details. I like to track our supplements. We make our clients track their supplements themselves because oftentimes we're taking things for reasons we don't understand. We don't even remember who recommended that we take them. We're just on kind of autopilot. It might even be that that supplement was meant to be for a short time, but it helped for a short time. And so we kept taking it. And that's where a place where we can get help from advisor who can be looking and actually addressing deficiencies to understand why we are doing that. And I also love to have patients ourselves lab track. So regular old serum labs, not the hormone testing, not the stool testing, but that regular old serum labs. There's so much information there about our gross health. So the labs we get from the doctor, even if it's just a TSH with our CBC, which has all our blood counts in it, just tracking them and looking at them in almost a Sesame Street fashion. Like, did something change? Is it
Mhm.
different? But that's again where we start to take a deeper level of agency in being able to show up and ask questions. One of the primary tenets of a functional practice should be a therapeutic partnership. And I really think that as patients, we have to become partners in our own healthcare. We can't be looking to our providers to be the God who's going to fix all, solve all. It is a partnership. And so owning that data for yourself allows you to show up and ask a whole different kind of question.
I love that. And do you have, I don't know if it with women who are still cycling, do you have them track their cycle too?
Oh, good point. 1,000%. Talking as a postmenopausal woman, like 1,000%, yes, cycle tracking, which I did all the time
Mhm,
before there
mhm.
were apps.
Yeah, yes. But I'm just so grateful that there are apps now too, to make things so much easier. And then one of the areas I found helpful was even movement tracking for me, of just like
Totally.
listening, like what is serving, me, like what feels good, and I had a limiting belief when I was younger that walking just wasn't the juice wasn't worth the squeeze. And I was like, if it's not hard, it's not worth it. And I had to dismantle a lot of that in a lot of areas of my life. And now walking is probably my preferred way of moving my body. And it was only through that inquiry really that I realized, I was like, oh my gosh, this whole time I've been missing out. And so that was a huge part for me, is just tracking movement, because it was movement that was really, it was what really led me to that diagnosis, was the burnout from exercise.
Totally.
And so I was so, and I look back at it, I was so grateful for, I guess in a way, pushing myself to the brink of like, girl, you need to look at this,
Yes.
and so I think is another little area that we could take a look at, because a lot of us we're overworking out, not all of us, but some of us, right? We're on the hour Peloton, and we're doing the most because we were
Yep.
told to do so, and looking at seeing how that supports you too.
Yeah,
You know,
I really like how you're incorporating these different kinds of activities too, and in shorter periods of time. I think there's a big lesson there in terms of how we incorporate things into our life as well. Walking, I'm sure you can do with Kingston and get
yeah.
that into your life, right? So I wake up early in the morning, and the first thing I do are posture exercise. I do a half an hour of like 1 minute movements over a half hour period. I'm not working out, but I'm moving my body to start the day. And I do that before I do a 20-minute workout, right? But it's that morning time that's mine. It's just for me. And the shorter sprints have allowed me to stack on top of an existing habit and be able to support myself one step at a time without, I don't say I'm going to work out for an hour in the morning. I say, I'm doing my half hour of posture exercises, and I'm listening to something really motivating during that time. It's the entry to the day. And then I'm going to move my body a little bit more intentionally after that. But I'm able to stack instead of looking at, oh, it's the hour on the Peloton or it's not at all.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That is such a profound way of looking at it. And it just, there's so much fluidity there too.
Yes.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Wow, I'm just trying to think, like I'm hoping as everyone's listening to this, like just kind of that gentle reevaluation of how we can really tune into ourselves. And that it doesn't need to be about this chase. It doesn't need to be about like, I've got to get this, I need to figure out what's going on with me. Like I said, we talk so much about this, is like when you take a look at all of it, with diagnosis or not, we've got to have that agency, and we have to be willing to listen to our bodies to find out what is right for us. I love that you've brought in so many tiers of tracking as well. Andrea, honey, where can we tap in more to get
Yeah.
more of you? I know that you are changing the world through educating practitioners out there, so that that there is more of a relationship, that there is more a partnership when it comes to these healing journeys. So thank you for that. But I know that we can also plug in directly to you now as well.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you, Mariza. So if you go to andreanakayama.com, that will lead you to the training, my podcast for practitioners, although all people like to listen to it. You've been a repeat guest. It's been lovely. So they could search for you on my podcast page. And then anything else that's coming up, I'm working on a book, and all the information will be there. And the book is geared towards the patient population taking this kind of agency. I call it functional self-health care. So more about that at andreanakayama.com.
Perfect. And the podcast, really quickly, is the 15-minute Matrix podcast. I'm going to have links for all of that inside of the show notes. And I just want to say thank you so much. You are always such a breath of fresh air, but you are literally helping to define the way that the direction in which medicine is moving into. And so I just want to say thank you for your incredible contribution to that work, and for coming on the show and sharing just your brilliance. Just,
Oh,
oh,
thank you so much. Thank you. was so much fun.
Thank you so much, honey. See you soon.